Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Missouri Board of Pharmacy's webinar on pharmacy technician compliance. This is the first webinar that I believe the board has done specifically for technicians, and we are excited to provide the program today. Our goal today is to provide you with some technician compliance information, to tell you some information about current Missouri law, and also some other regulatory things that are going on with the board. We encourage you to visit the board's website regularly for additional information. Really excited about the program today. We have two inspectors who will be presenting. Actually, three inspectors who will be presenting and will provide you information on not only what the law says, but also what we see in the field. Again, thank you everyone for joining us. And at this time, we'll begin our webinar.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Glinsky. I'm the Chief Inspector with the board. Today's presenters, besides myself, I have Elena Wolzak and Lisa Thompson. Both of those are inspectors with the board. Elena has the Kansas City area, and Lisa is an inspector in the Springfield area. For most of you, probably have never been on one of our webinars before. You'll have you're in listen-only mode. If you have any trouble connecting via the internet to the sound, there is an option on your GoToWebinar toolbar that you can convert to a phone call, and it provides you the dialing number and the access code so you can join by phone if you're having trouble using your computer audio. This has been approved for 1 hour of CE. You must be officially signed up and logged in to GoToWebinar. If you are not, you will not get CE for the program. I have more instructions at the end of the program about how what's required to get the CE. We do not report CE to the CPE monitor, so it's important that you save your CE certificate that you get from us. And again, I'll talk more about CE at the end of the program. We do have handouts posted on the board's website. If you go to our website and go to the section where it announces this webinar, there's now a link to a PDF of the handouts there. We also record all our webinars, and you can watch any of our past webinars. If you go to our publications and resources page, you'll find all our videos and webinars on there. You do not get CE credit for watching a past recording. We will try to answer questions at the end of the webinar, time permitting. So if you'd like to send us a question, you can go to your GoToWebinar toolbar and down in the question section, type a question for us and just hit send. We will, again, take them at the end of the program, time permitting. So now we'll start the program today. We're going to talk about the role of the pharmacy technician. The program is kind of broken into different sections. I'm going to talk first about some issues about pharmacy technicians, what they are, registration, things you can and can't do. Elena will then give us some examples of some of the compliance issues we find. And then Lisa's going to give us a discussion on just drug diversion in the pharmacy. And then I'll come back with some how you can help suggestions. And then we'll take questions at the end. So by definition, a pharmacy technician is someone who assists in the practice of pharmacy, or it could be someone who just has independent access to drug stock in a pharmacy. That is who is required to be licensed with us, those people meeting that definition. However, your employer may require you to be licensed with us even if you don't perform that. Any of those activities. You can get a license registration without working in a pharmacy or doing these activities with us. But if you're doing any of those that are in the definition, you are required to have a license with the board in order to do that. There is a difference between technician certification and the board's license. The Board of Pharmacy has no requirement for technicians to be certified. Employers may have that requirement. There could be other people requiring you to be certified, but the board licensing process does not require certification. In the future, as technicians' roles expand, there could be more requirements put on technicians who do those expanded roles, but at the current time, there is no requirement by the board to be certified. So examples of assisting in the practice of pharmacy. Most of you are probably involved in the dispensing process in some way, prescription process, data entry type things, or maybe actually counting, labeling that. Duties also would include managing the drug inventory, checking in drug orders, putting drugs away on the shelf, managing the inventory. Another role the practice of the technician is interaction with patients. So you're the ones who may be the first they meet at the pharmacy. You're gathering patient profile information and data from them, or you may be the one at the end of the process who's interacting with them by providing them the filled prescription in that. We have all of the duties you do have some aspect with patient safety. So your role is very important to the board. The board's role is to protect the public, and you do play a role in that, in helping us protect the public in how you do your jobs. As I mentioned earlier, the technician role will probably be increasing over as time comes. There are states allowing technicians to do other things that haven't been allowed in the past. Missouri is looking at some of those things. So in the future, we expect to see more of a role of the technician in some of the activities in the pharmacy. Today, we have technicians from all across the practice. So I do want to caution, there are a couple slides coming up that I talk about that have different ramifications if you work within a hospital setting. So some of the things I tell you may not apply to you. And the reason for that is in Missouri, the Department of Health regulates the activity of the pharmacy inside the hospital for what would normally be called like an inpatient. So there's certain activities that occur there that are regulated by the Department of Health that would have different regulations in the Board of Pharmacy. So on those slides, I will kind of point out to you what might be different for a hospital technician. So one of the things is where can you work is the thing. A technician can only work within a licensed pharmacy, and this is different for hospital. A technician can work inside the hospital there. They can work outside of the actual the pharmacy room. But for anyone outside of a hospital, they would have to be working within a licensed pharmacy. You cannot work at an off-site location. Your pharmacy, if they rent out a room, can't rent a building next door and put technicians over there doing work without getting that facility licensed with the board. You're not allowed to work remotely from home. There are technologies now that technicians probably could do some work from home on a home computer, do order entry and stuff, but currently in Missouri, that would not be allowed. You must be working within a licensed pharmacy. There is one exception to that rule, and it has to do with immunizations. We do allow technicians to go off-site with a pharmacist and assist in providing an immunization clinic outside of the pharmacy, and that's the one exception to when a technician can work outside of a licensed pharmacy. Some functions that you are not allowed to do. These are functions that are specifically in rule or statute that says only a pharmacist can do these things. So just go through some of these. A technician is not allowed to administer a vaccine or a drug to a patient. Even if you are trained from another profession, when you're working as a technician in a pharmacy, you are not allowed to provide that vaccine to the patient. Transferring a controlled substance prescription, both state and federal law says that has to be done pharmacist to pharmacist. Counseling of a patient can only be done by a pharmacist or by an intern under the supervision of a pharmacist. A patient is not allowed to counsel a patient. I believe Elena will talk a little bit more, some examples of that. A technician cannot perform the final data entry verification or the final product verification. Only pharmacists are allowed to perform those verifications on the data that's been entered into the computer or the final product, where they're checking to make sure the right label and the right drug are in the bottle. a technician would not be allowed to make any kind of clinical judgment, such as overriding a DUR message independently. So if you're running the computer having DUR messages and the pharmacist is not seeing them and you're just overriding them, you're not allowed to do that. It's the pharmacist should be involved in making the decision to override a DUR message. Long-term care regulations prevent a technician from going to a nursing facility, a long-term care facility, and applying a label to a prescription out there. An example of that would be a label change where they change the dose. It's out there saying 1 a day on the bubble card, and the prescriber has now changed it to a half a tablet or 2 tablets, made it some kind of thing. The pharmacy needs to send a new label out. Only a pharmacist could go to the home and apply the label to that outside of the pharmacy there. Pharmacy technicians must be supervised by a pharmacist at all times. And there is some difference between hospital pharmacy and community pharmacy in this aspect. So what I say here, if you're in a hospital and you're doing inpatient activities, you would be under Department of Health regulations. But if you're filling an outpatient prescription, then what I tell you here would apply. So in a hospital setting, if you work at a hospital and has questions about this, it would probably be best to ask the pharmacist or your director of pharmacy if you have questions on what you can and can't do. And how you're supervised. But pharmacy technicians in general must be supervised at all times. That means when no pharmacist is present, that means no prescription processing, and that includes data entry, label generation, counting, pouring, preparing anything for a pharmacist to check label later. So technically, if a patient came in and you're in the pharmacy and there's no pharmacist present, and they have a new prescription, they could drop off the written prescription to you, but that's where it stops. You're not allowed to go any further than that with that until the pharmacist returns. Same goes for selling a prescription that's already filled and checked by the pharmacist, ready to be in the will call bin, ready to be sold to the patient. If a pharmacist is not present, a technician cannot sell that to the patient. No accepting telephone prescriptions when the pharmacist isn't present. The pharmacist must be present for you to take a telephone prescription. There'd be no compounding activity when the pharmacist isn't present. That includes both non-sterile and sterile compounding activity. And then there'd be no drug inventory activity, such as checking in orders, putting drugs on the shelf, handling the drugs in that manner when there's no pharmacist present. Your work must be checked by a pharmacist, and that's prior to dispensing. A pharmacist is required to check filled prescriptions for both the contents and the label. They're also required to check any compounds, both sterile and non-sterile, that a technician may make. And they're also required to, if you reconstitute a product, prior to that giving out, the pharmacist may have checked it all and it just needs the water added to it. If a technician adds the water to it, the pharmacist must still make one final check of that product before it's given to the patient. In Missouri, a technician cannot check the work of another technician. This is known as tech check tech. It is allowed in some states. In Missouri, at the present time, it is not allowed. So all technician work must be checked by a pharmacist. So now I'm going to turn it over to Elena, who will talk about some of the compliance issues we have seen.
Good afternoon. One of the most common compliance issues that we see with technicians relates to the House Bill 600 tax suspension. This is a state law that requires licensees must be tax compliant with state income tax. This law is applicable for anyone with a professional license or registration. If you aren't compliant, then the board automatically has to suspend your license. So how would you know if you have an issue? The process starts with the Missouri Department of Revenue. They would send you a letter notifying you that you are delinquent, and if you fail to comply, then they will notify the Missouri Board of Pharmacy. The Department of Revenue will send a list of names of individuals who will be suspended to the Missouri Board of Pharmacy. Then you would next receive a letter from the Board of Pharmacy, and informing you that you are going to be suspended. And if you do not take care of your tax issues, then the Board of Pharmacy has to suspend you. So you would next receive a letter if you hadn't cleared your tax issues up from the Board of Pharmacy informing you that you are suspended. Please note that these letters are sent to your address that you have on file with the board. It's not sent to your employer, not sent to your employment address. So it's very important that if you move or change your address for any reason, that you need to keep the board updated with your address. You can do that on our website under the General Information tab, Online Services, and then Individual Address Change. So if you happen to get suspended due to the House Bill 600 tax suspension, you cannot work. It's important to know you cannot work until your suspension is lifted. You need to be sure that you're in communication with the Department of Revenue to get your tax issue cleared up. And then once you become compliant with your taxes, the Department of Revenue will provide a tax compliance letter. Another issue that we see commonly with technicians is working on an expired license. Technician license will expire May 31st of this year. Renewal postcards were already sent out the beginning of March. So if you haven't received your renewal, you need to be sure and contact the board office. Again, this is another reason for you to make sure that you keep your address updated with the board so that you receive your license renewals. So if you do not renew by May 31st, then you can no longer work as a technician. You do have a grace period of time to renew between June 1st and June 30th. Again, you cannot work during this time until you have renewed. And if you do not renew by June 30th, then your license becomes null and void and you would need to send in a new application. The next technician compliance issue that we are seeing increase lately is failed drug screens. Types of failed drug screens that you may be imposed upon is a pre-employment drug screen. On a condition of an employment with your employer, you may have to pass a drug screen. Also random drug screens, and then there are for-cause drug screens. Some examples of a for-cause drug screen would be due to suspicion, reasonable cause, maybe there was a smell of alcohol in someone's breath at work, or we've seen cases where controlled substance losses at pharmacies can trigger a for-cause drug screen for all the employees of the pharmacy. So you could test positive on a drug screen for an illicit substance. An example of that would be marijuana. Even though marijuana might be legal in some states, it is not legal in Missouri, and that can cause the Board of Pharmacy to take action against your technician license for a positive drug screen for an illicit substance. You could have a positive drug screen for prescription drugs. You would need to be able to substantiate those positive results with documentation of a prescription for yourself, or that would be considered a positive result that would not be substantiated with documentation. And you could also test positive for alcohol. And it is of note that some employers, it is a violation of their policy if you do refuse to provide a sample for a drug screen, which could also lead to consequences against your license with the Board of Pharmacy. So it's really important for you to understand that your actions outside of work can have consequences and can trigger Board of Pharmacy action against your technician license. Another technician compliance issue is violation of patient confidentiality. A lot of you know this as HIPAA. The Board of Pharmacy also has patient confidentiality laws, and there's a couple of types of violation of patient confidentiality. The first one we're going to talk about is intentional. So I wanted to provide a few examples of what the board has seen, some cases. One case we've seen, there was a technician working at a pharmacy, accepted a job at a different pharmacy, and took a customer list and customer names from their previous employer to their new employer. That would be an intentional violation of patient confidentiality. Another example would be someone accessing a file that they should not have accessed, such as a high-profile person and you wanted to see what drugs they were taking, or if you're accessing other friends of friends files at the pharmacy to tell friends what they're taking. And lastly, the board has had a case where we had an example where a customer a technician asked a customer out on a date via a text message to that customer. The customer ended up making and filing a complaint, and the investigation revealed that the technician violated the patient confidentiality by obtaining the telephone number she texted from the pharmacy records. So there's also unintentional violation of patient confidentiality. Some of these examples include selling prescriptions to the wrong patient. That's why it's important to verify patients' addresses or patients' date of birth when you're selling prescriptions. Bagging errors, where you could have receipts that could be stapled to the wrong bag and it's releasing someone else's private information. Paper document errors and labeling errors, where the prescription may have the incorrect patient name labeled and that is dispensed to the patient. So as a technician, you play a vital role in the pharmacy, and it's important for you to understand that you're taking steps to make sure you're paying attention to detail when it comes to patient confidentiality. It's important that you also are aware of your employer's policies and procedures surrounding this area, and I'm sure a lot of you are required to complete HIPAA training every year, so it's real good to make sure that you're doing that and understanding those policies and procedures. Another issue we see is non-drug theft. This can be theft from the pharmacy, but it can also be theft from the area of the store. Some examples are cash, embezzling. We've had examples where bookkeepers have embezzled thousands of dollars from the pharmacy. Theft of underringing of customers. There's instances where underringing was occurring for friends and family. Credit and returns processing, where technicians were creating false returns. And then we see a lot of coupons and gift card theft. Gift cards have a variety of cases. It's usually involving friends and family, and it's improper use of gift cards. We've also seen issues where it's theft of merchandise. One example we had a case where a technician was terminated for stealing a package of paper plates out of the break room. Then we had food and drink. Just keep in mind that you really need to make sure you're paying for your items and you keep your receipts. We've had numerous instances of technicians being in trouble for theft of food and drink, and a couple of examples of these were a pack of gum or a can of soda. And lastly, we have seen theft of time. This would be an instance where you would be altering your time card, and that would lead to theft. I'll talk a little bit about drug theft next. Some examples of that would be prescription drugs, controlled substances, and non-controlled substances. This would also include over-the-counter drugs. Our next speaker, Lisa, will be going into more detail in this area, so we're not going to talk much about it at this point. Another technician compliance issue we see has to do with criminal activity. Be aware that your criminal history can prevent you from getting a technician license, or it can actually put your technician license on a conditional registration with the board. That would be something like probation. So anything you get in trouble for criminally can actually affect your technician license. Some of those examples would be a DWI, a DUI, a drug possession, drug distribution, assault, fraud, and shoplifting. You would have to report these on your renewal, and the board would look into them. So your activities outside of work can have consequences and can affect your technician license. We've had some different instances where technicians have been a part of healthcare fraud and some schemes that were involved with billing. It was a fraudulent billing scheme. It was instances where a different drug or product or a different quantity is being billed than what was actually dispensed to the patient. So again, be sure that you're understanding what your policies and procedures are where you work at. If someone is asking you to do something that's wrong, know what avenues you have to report that. Also, a failure to reverse claims. Some of you on the webinar may be aware of what a return to stock is. For those who may not, a return to stock is when a prescription is filled and it goes to the will call area to be sold. The patient doesn't ever present to the pharmacy to pick it up, so it is returned back to the pharmacy shelf. We've seen instances where the pharmacy has failed to reverse the claim on the billing when they returned this prescription to stock, and that would be considered fraud. And we've also had large-scale fraud with nursing home returns being reversed without giving credit for what was being returned. And usually technicians are involved in a lot of the return process. So it's important to understand you need to be sure that credit is being given for those returns. And lastly, we've seen examples with owed medications. A lot of times the patient may not return to the pharmacy to pick up what's owed to them. When that happens, that claim should be reversed for the amount that the patient did not get. A lot of you probably talk about issues with your employer when you do fraud, waste, and abuse training every year. So I'm sure the vast majority of you complete some type of fraud, waste, and abuse training annually. Some other technician compliance issues we run into are dispensing errors. We do investigate dispensing errors, and we do find a lot of the time it's not just that one person is involved in the error, it's usually multiple causes of a process breakdown. A lot of times it can generate and initiate with you as the technician. So even though the pharmacist may fail to catch the error, it may have initiated or started with you as the technician. A lot of technicians are doing data or order entry, and we've seen instances where the incorrect drug or the incorrect strength of a drug has been selected, and that unfortunately ends up getting dispensed. A lot of technicians actually perform the counting of the prescriptions, and we see when miscounting happens, usually that was a tech that was involved. We also have techs that are usually involved with the compounding process and making the preparation and the compound log, and we have seen errors in that area. We've also seen errors in the area of packaging, labeling, and when you're providing it to the customer. So again, you play a vital role in the pharmacy for patient safety. It's very important for a technician to be sure you're following the processes and procedures that are put in place for you, which are there to help secure and help prevent errors from happening. We've seen issues of technicians actually at work who were impaired. Being impaired affects your ability to work properly. Some examples where a technician has been impaired at work were due to prescription drug abuse, illicit drug abuse, alcohol abuse where you could smell alcohol in their breath at work, a medical condition, mental illness, and prescription drug side effects. So let's talk a little bit about consequences. So this is what happens when the Board of Pharmacy gets complaints. It's important for you to understand that there's a mandatory reporting for employers. You need to be aware that your employers have a mandate by law to report any termination to us. So if a technician is if a technician is terminated, that will ultimately be reported by the employer to the Board of Pharmacy. The board investigates complaints. That would be a complaint that the board would investigate. An investigation would be conducted, which would lead to a board review. And a board review could end up taking action against your technician license. One of the actions could be conditional registration. That would be like a probation for a certain amount of time. Your name could be added to the employment disqualification list. It's known as the EDL. This would be like your technician license being revoked and you would not be allowed to work in a pharmacy. And lastly, the Board of Pharmacy can also send you letters, such as a letter of warning. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about what we see on inspections. Some of these are observations that we note whenever we're there on a routine inspection, and they relate back to you as a technician and how you're involved in these observations. So some of these that we see related to technician work are a failure to offer counseling. So with every new or refill prescription, you must make a verbal offer to counsel. And this would include those entities who have drive-thrus and the patient is at the drive-thru. You must make the verbal offer to counsel. Another observation that we've seen on inspections with technicians is that the tech is actually providing counseling. Tom already mentioned earlier that as a technician, you can't provide counseling. I'd like to provide a few examples that we've seen when we've been on our routine inspections. One example is you're making a transaction at the cash register and you're selling the prescription to the customer, and they ask you if they can take it with food. You are not able to answer that question. You will need to actually get the pharmacist and have them personally speak with the patient. You're not allowed to look through the leaflets that are there with the medication or read the labeling off of the container of the bottle to the patient. Again, you would need to get the pharmacist to personally answer that question. Another example that we've seen that relates back to providing counseling is there will be a customer at a drive-through who will ask a question on what the name of their medication is and how they're supposed to take it. As a technician, again, you need to have the pharmacist to come personally speak with the patient at the drive-through. It would not be acceptable for you to go to the pharmacist or yell across the pharmacy to the pharmacist to ask the question the patient asked you, and for the pharmacist to relay the information to you to relay to the customer. The pharmacist needs to be the person to relay that information to the patient. A lot of times we'll see technicians who are handling loose tabs and caps with no gloves. When you're filling med packs and bubble packs, it's important that you are wearing gloves for sanitation purposes. We also find instances of overfilled stock bottles on inspections. An overfilled bottle is when a bottle contains more than what the label says. A bottle that states it has a quantity of 100 in it, when actuality it ends up having a quantity of 119, and it would be an example of an overfilled bottle. This would be misbranding, and it is not allowed. What we see happening is in an overfilled stock bottle situation, a pharmacy may have several partial bottles and you want to combine those all into one, and so you're dumping them all into one bottle. Well, that would not be allowed. Another example that we see is return to stock bottles, where you're actually dumping those back into the manufacturer stock container, and that would not be allowed. A return to stock needs to stay in the return to stock container. Something else we see on inspections are the sharing of user passwords, especially with CSAUS and pseudoephedrine sales. An example of this would be a pharmacist is leaving to go on vacation and leaves you with their user and password for CSAUS for you to use. So that would be something that would not be allowed. If you are a user who is allowed to use CSAUS, you need to make sure you have your own user and your own password. Another example that we see is with pseudoephedrine sales, and there's a new technician who's new to the pharmacy, and they're working and it's their first week and they're not able to log on to Sudafed. They haven't received a password yet, and you give them your password to use until they can get one. That would not be allowed. And lastly, I'd just like to say we've seen instances where a pharmacist is signed on to a computer under their credentials and a technician accesses that computer to start verifying prescriptions. That would be something that would not be allowed. Some other general observations that we see during inspections include reconstituting without pharmacist check. Tom's mentioned earlier, this is something that a technician can't just pour the water and add the water in. You need to make sure that the pharmacist does check that after you are adding the water. Even when you're busy, you just need to make sure you take the time that the pharmacist does check after you reconstitute. Something else we see involves return to stock labeling and expiration dates, and usually it is a technician who is performing the return to stocks. What we see is information being blacked out on the return to stock pharmacy bottle. The Board of Pharmacy doesn't have any rules that require you to blank out or black out any information, but your employer may have policies and procedures that require you to do this. It's important for you to note that on a return to stock, the drug name, the date dispensed, and the prescription number must remain visible. So sometimes when you're marking information out, some of those areas are also being marked out. So again, important to make sure that the drug name, date dispensed, and prescription number remains visible. Something else we see a lot on our inspections are that return to stocks are overlooked when you're checking for outdates. So it's important whenever you're checking for outdates that you're looking at your return to stocks and they would be good for 1 year from the date dispensed. So be sure if they're beyond that 1 year that you are pulling them with your out dates. We've already talked a little bit about dispensing errors. We do find these on inspections also. And when we do find these, we issue quality assurance. And a lot of times, again, what we're seeing is the wrong drug or the wrong strength. And they do relate directly back to the technician, usually who performed order entry. So again, even though the pharmacist is checking the prescriptions, the errors do usually start with a tech. We've also seen inaccurate compounding records and compound testing failures. As far as the inaccurate records go, a lot of times you as a technician are performing the compound and you may be the individual who's filling out the log. We've seen instances where an expired ingredient has been used in compounding. Another instance that we've seen is where an assigned beyond use date is greater than one of the ingredients used in the preparation. Again, these are things that may start with you as a technician and they're not caught by the pharmacist and the errors make it to the patient. We will take some samples from the pharmacy that are compounded for testing, and we will test these for potency. We have had some of these compounds come back as failing potency, and usually this is a result from improper mixing or failing to follow really what you were trained to do. And for any technicians who may be performing sterile compounding, we do have a few observations that we see on those inspections. Skills assessment being past due is one of the observations that we have been finding. And it's important to know after you complete your initial training, the training must be completed annually for your media fills, your competencies, and your visual observations. Some other things that we witness on sterile compounding inspections include improper hand washing, improper garbing, improper aseptic technique, blocking first air, improper cleaning technique, failure to document, and a failure to follow your pharmacy policies and procedures. So most all pharmacies have policies and procedures in place, and we continue to witness technicians not following the policies and procedures of the pharmacy. So know your pharmacy's policies and procedures and understand those. They're there for a reason. Again, you're a vital role to the pharmacy, and what you do every day is important to patient safety. I'll now turn the next portion of the webinar over to Lisa, and she's going to talk about drug diversion.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa Thompson. I'm the inspector down in the southwest corner of Missouri, and I'm going to talk briefly to you today about diversion. The dictionary defines diversion as an instance of turning something aside from its course. So when you talk about drug diversion, we're turning the purpose of the drug away from its original intended licit medical purpose. We see diversion in all types of manners. Theft is the normal thing that most people associate with diversion, and it does occur and in multiple different ways, but also there's other types of diversion that we see as well. Fraudulent prescriptions, extending refills on prescriptions for yourself or for family members, intentional sale of prescriptions to the wrong person, overfilling prescriptions intentionally, to sell to someone, adulteration or tampering with products such as injectable products or cough syrup. So they would take out the potent drug and then dilute it with something else. When we talk to people about why they divert, most people say that they divert because they have a perceived need. And when I thought about it and thought about all of our different cases, there's a lot of different reasons why people have their need. They can have medical need, financial need. Peer pressure is very a really thing that does not go away in our life. We tend to think about it as being important for kids and teenagers, but as we grow up, it's still very vital in our life. Addiction. So types of different medical needs that people have and things that we've seen, cases that we've had. I've had investigations where people have diverted from complications that they've had, chronic health problems that have led them to divert, steal pain medications to create fraudulent prescriptions for themselves. Some of those prescriptions were started as original valid medical prescriptions from a physician that they could no longer get refilled, and so then they created on their own. We recently had a case where a technician created prescriptions and was diverting medications for muscle relaxers because she needed to continue working because she had a financial need. So these are tied together. Sometimes we have people diverting. We had a case where someone was diverting phentermine because she was having problems staying awake on her drive home. So, and then we have other cases where people are diverting sleeping medications because they're having trouble sleeping. Financial reasons. So we have people who are diverting to sell prescription drugs, or they're keeping their medications. I'm sorry. They're, again, like I said, diverting their medications so that they can keep their job because they have a financial need. Pressure from family and friends. I've talked to numerous people who told me that they were diverting medications because their family members had a need. I've talked to people who have told me they diverted for a grandmother, a father, a friend, people who had cancer, people who they just saw that were in pain and they wanted to help them. I've talked to people who have told me that they diverted medication because they were in abusive relationships. They were threatened with custody issues with their children. If they didn't steal medications for their abusive partner, they would be threatened with taking their children away. We've also had somebody who told us specifically they were told pressured by a partner to steal hydrocodone, and the partner was then going to trade the hydrocodone for other drugs that he was addicted to. So addiction can be a prominent role in this cycle of diversion as well. Addiction for yourself. Sometimes it starts with, I'll only just take one. I only need just one. And then it grows to something else. So we've had reports of people just starting with one and then they've robbed pharmacies and it's grown into a much larger thing. So be aware. Don't put yourself at risk. Know your company's policies and procedures and follow them. So there's a lot of different policies and procedures that you need to be aware of related to the controlled substances, the C2 keys, who has the keys, who's allowed to access the cabinet. If you're responsible for doing smart counts or counts of controlled substances, who accesses the drugs, who do you give them to, who puts them back in the cabinet. Make sure that if you are supposed to count a drug and return it to a pharmacist, you're doing that right away. You're not leaving something out on the counter so that somebody could potentially divert that medication. If you're involved in the counting for prescriptions, if you're supposed to circle quantities and initial drugs, make sure that you're doing all of that. You're being accountable. Does your pharmacy have policies about keeping personal items in the pharmacy? Do you have bag checks that you're doing at the end of the day? So make sure that you're following all of your company's policies. Do you have involvement in your own prescriptions or your family members' prescriptions? We see this a lot, that people are involved in their own prescriptions, and that allows them to create fraudulent prescriptions. Ordering and inventory is another way that we see people diverting. So it could be with the CSAUS passwords, having independent access to be ordering and then checking in those orders. When you check the orders in, are they being left on the counter so that somebody could divert them, or are they being turned over to the pharmacist right away to be put back in the cabinet? So make sure you're watching that. If you're in a long-term care or in a hospital setting, we've seen people overfilling Omnicells as a way to disguise a diversion situation. So make sure you're collaborating with other healthcare professionals, such as nursing, and watching for syringes or vials, things just not looking right when you go to do your fills. Is something not look the way it's supposed to? So be aware and ask questions if you're not sure. Watch signs of diversions in your coworkers. So look for changes of behavior, suspicious behavior. And what we often find is that a lot of times people assume that because somebody's been there a long time, a long-term coworker, that it couldn't be them who could be diverting. And a lot of times we find out that it is that person. But sometimes something happens in their life that opens them up to becoming a diverter. So they could have changes in their life, stresses that have happened. And so be on the lookout for a failure to follow policies or any type of changes in behavior. There is a DEA regulation that states that an employee who has knowledge of drug diversion from his employer by a fellow employee has an obligation to report such information. Failure to report information of drug diversion will be considered in determining the feasibility of continuing to allow an employee to work in a drug security area. So it has real consequences. You cannot just turn a blind eye if you suspect that drug diversion is going on. Other consequences that incur with your employer, you could have discipline or termination, and employers are required to notify the Board of Pharmacy of any discipline or termination of technicians. The Board of Pharmacy then conducts an investigation, which could lead to potential discipline, which could include a letter of warning, conditional registration, and potentially being added to the EDL list. There's also potential criminal charges that could be filed by your employer, local and federal drug crimes, and up to and potential prosecution for tampering. And next, I'm going to turn it over back to Tom, and he's going to talk about how you can help.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm just going to go through some slides here on how you can help protect your registration, your license with us, and how you can also help protect the public. So as Elena said earlier, renew your license on time. We already mailed renewal notices and postcards. If you didn't get one, then you should be calling the board office to request how you can renew. Board requirements that you keep your address up to date and your employment information up to date. On our website, we have a link that you can do this all online. So here's a picture of our website. If you choose online services, you can go there and update your address and update your employment address. You can also help protect your license by responding to correspondence from the board. If you get letters from the board about your application, House Bill 600 suspensions, you might get a letter from a board inspector or a letter from the board. Just make sure you respond to any correspondence from the board. You can also sign up for our board email alerts. We don't have very many technicians signed up for those. You can go to our website. And there's a link there, a news and alerts, and it has a sign up link on the next page. You can get email notices from the board on things that are happening and updates. You can help protect the public by help preventing errors. If you're doing order entry or filling, counting, and labeling, if you have a doubt, ask. Always double check your work. Look again. If you're involved in processing prescriptions and you have DUR messages, make sure you're relaying those to the pharmacist. Recommend that you slow down and stay focused. Highly recommend not having your phone with you while you're working so you're not distracted. You need to, as Elena said, you need to follow the pharmacy's policies and procedures. Most pharmacies have procedures covering everything, but we find out that technicians haven't been properly trained or retrained to make sure they understand how to do that. Offering counseling, as Elena said, it is a requirement. It's the chance to offer that patient a chance to talk to the pharmacist if they have any questions. It's also a way to, during that conversation, is to detect errors in labeling or maybe the wrong drug being given. And then if your pharmacy has an error reporting procedure, make sure you're following that when you uncover errors. And that way people learn from past mistakes, and that's the purpose of having these quality assurance programs. You need to know what to do in case something happens while you're working. If you're working and an impaired coworker comes in smelling of alcohol, do you know how to handle that? If you don't, these are all scenarios of things you need to ask your employer on what is our policy if an impaired coworker comes in. Do you know what to do if you have your own substance abuse? Your employer may offer an employee assistance program that might provide you help, or there's other help out there. Pharmacy robberies have been on the rise in the last few years. Do you know what to do in case you do have someone coming in robbing your pharmacy? Again, ask your employer what your procedures are. As Elena talked about, confidentiality breaches, do you know what your pharmacy's policy is on how to handle those? Should you witness drug diversion, as Lisa said, as an employee, you're required to let your employer know. Fraudulent prescriptions, if you're filling prescriptions and you believe something's fraudulent, don't look the other way. Let the pharmacist know there's something suspicious about the prescription. If you're asked to partake in any kind of healthcare fraud, what are you supposed to do about that? And again, Elena mentioned fraud, waste, and abuse training will help you how you handle that. And again, follow your pharmacy policies and procedures and know what a violation of pharmacy law is and what you should do if you see one. So how you can help again is be vigilant, don't be complacent, don't be afraid to report issues. You need to start with reporting to your management and the pharmacist that's there. Start with them if you have any issues. After that, if you're not getting resolution to them and it's a violation of law, you can, if you choose, want to report it to the Board of Pharmacy. You can do that officially by going through the board office or going through an inspector. You need to be honest with your employer. That includes the application process. They're required to get waivers depending on what kind of criminal history you have. So you need to be honest with them. You need to be honest with them if you get any kind of House Bill 600 letter or any kind of EDL conditional registration letters. Let your employer knows what's going on. You need to be honest with the board and the inspector. So that's in the application process. Answer the questions honestly. On the renewal process, you will be asked if you've had any criminal charges. You need to be honest. During inspections, inspectors will ask you questions knowing you're the one that's doing something. You need to be honest with them and tell them how you actually do it, not what you think we want to hear. And during investigations, we sometimes interview technicians. You need to be honest with us on what's happening in the pharmacy. Speak up if something's not right. If you're asked to dispense an outdated drug, create a fraudulent record, fail to reverse a claim, cover up an error, practice unsupervised, or sell something without a pharmacist present, you need to speak up and tell your employer that that is not correct, and don't go along with something that you know that is not right. Remember, you play an important role, as we talked about, in protecting the public. Your work is very important. No pharmacy, in the career I've been with the board, only a couple times have I ever seen a pharmacy not have a technician employed. Your role, they can't survive without you. It's very important work. But remember that patient safety matters. And the other thing is to remember is it's your license and it's your responsibility to protect that license. Just a couple quick things we do on our website, have some stuff there. I talked about guidance documents in past webinars, newsletters. You can sign up for email alerts. Don't be afraid to ask questions to your inspectors or staff. And then specifically, we have an information guide on our website that's specific for pharmacy technicians. It has different questions with the answers that we commonly get asked. And then we also have a technician quiz that you can take yourself just to gauge your knowledge of regulatory issues. It will grade it for you and then give you the right answer at the end. So now we'll take questions. If you have any questions, you can submit them by entering it on your toolbar and then hitting send, and we'll answer some of your questions.
Thank you, Tom, Elena, and Lisa. And again, if you have any questions, enter a question now. As they are reviewing questions, I see a couple of them that I can answer for everyone. Someone has asked if the board is considering Tech Check Tech. The board is not considering that actively at this time. We understand that there are some hospital-related proposals that have been circulated, but the board is not considering that right now. The board has been asked, or someone has asked, if we are required to be certified, or will the board be requiring certification of all technicians? Again, that is, the board has not discussed that requirement. The board has talked about technician training and education, but the board, their current position is that mandatory certification for all technicians is not something that the board is pursuing at this time. We have some questions about renewals. If you didn't get a renewal postcard, please call the board office. You cannot renew online without your PIN number. That number is 573-522-2425. So you're going to need your PIN number to do that, and then you can renew online. We have had some issues with the online renewal system. I believe the credit card processing is down. We have been researching it. It's due to an outside vendor. If you have difficulty renewing, please come back to the website, give it a couple of hours or even the next day. Hopefully we'll have that up and running. If you continue to have problems, just shoot the board an email. We're continuing to investigate and try to resolve all of the payment issues. Tom?
Okay, we'll take some of the questions, other questions that came in.
Okay. We have a couple questions about clarification of what a technician can do when a pharmacist is not present. So you mentioned a technician cannot accept a telephone prescription. How about a transfer prescription, or can a technician input a prescription that has been e-scribed or a transferred prescription sent electronically or faxed?
The answer is to both of those, no. They cannot conduct a transfer, either going out of the pharmacy or coming in without a pharmacist present, and they cannot start any of the data entry of a prescription regardless of how it got to the pharmacy.
How does the board define pharmacist present? There is usually only one pharmacist on duty at my pharmacy. For example, if the pharmacist goes to the restroom, does the technician have to stop everything?
The board, if you take a temporary break to go to the bathroom, the board does not believe that the technicians have to stop that. If you leave the building, that's a different story. But just to take a break to go out and counsel a patient or go to the restroom, no, the board does not believe. But you need to stay within the building. You can't leave the building and be considered present.
Continuing on that topic, can technicians sell things that are over the counter, like bandages, when a pharmacist is not present?
Yeah, you can sell anything over the counter without a pharmacist present. When I mention you can't sell, it's filled prescriptions. It's prescriptions that can't be. If that bandage was filled on a prescription and it's been run through and treated like a prescription, then no, you couldn't sell it. But just selling over the counter items are allowed.
Will I get my certification for free from watching this webinar?
The answer is yes. This is free board approved CE. Everyone who completes the survey at the end and will get a certificate in the mail telling you that the board give you 1 hour of CE for this program.
Okay, continuing without the pharmacist present, can a technician do invoice paperwork without the pharmacist?
It depends on what they can do work that's non-related to the practice of pharmacy, but let's say filing of invoices. Yes, you could do that, but you cannot be checking in a drug order and putting the drug away on the shelf. I think that question also said, could I do CE while I'm there? Yes, CE would not be a pharmacy, would not require a pharmacist.
And then here's somebody else asked that question. Is a technician allowed to check in a wholesale order and restock the shelves if the pharmacist is not on duty? And you just answered that. That would be no.
We're almost out of time, and I need to tell everyone about the CE process. So most of you have not been on our program before. So we're going to stop questions now. And just a plug for the next webinar. My next Lunch with the Chief webinar will be May 10th with BNDD. The administrator, Mike Boger, will be my guest on that program. And then in August, we'll do our annual legislative updates. So watch email alerts for future webinars.
We, as we get ready to wrap up, we have a good number of questions that have come in. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get to all of them, but what we would like to do, go to the board's website, sign up for the board's e-alert. We may be able to post some answers to some of these questions online so that we can at least answer those for you. If you have a specific question, you want to give us your email address, we'll send an answer right back out to you. But thank you, everyone, for participating. And sorry, we just don't have time to get to all the questions.
Okay, so the continuing education process here is once I tell you I'm going to close the webinar, do not close your browser, and then a little screen will come up and says an organizer has ended the webinar. Go to webinar, we'll exit, and then on that is a little close icon. Click close. Again, don't close your browser, and a survey screen will pop up. It has 5 true-false questions on it. Answer those questions and then click submit. Some people, if you're on a tablet, a phone, or an iPad, something like that, sometimes have trouble getting the survey. If you have trouble getting the survey, you can email us at compliance@pr.mo.gov, and we will email you the survey. You must get the email back to us within 24 hours if you want to get CE credit. And again, we will mail certificates out to everyone in approximately 30 days, and then we'll have a recording of this webinar on our website in about 30 days. So I am now going to close the webinar, so please don't close your browser and wait for that screen to come up.